I'd like to understand something that has been gnawing at me for months. How the United States and Israel, two countries with different histories, different political systems, and different strategic cultures, have arrived at this moment of escalating confrontation and war with Iran. Officials in Washington and Jerusalem insist their actions are grounded in history, law, and hard military realities. Critics say the opposite, but I wanted to learn for myself. I wanted to trace the fault lines back to their origins, to understand how 4 decades of mistrust, violence, and geopolitical maneuvering had shaped the decisions being made today. This is the story of how we got here. In 1979, the revolution that rewired the region, and every investigation into US-Iran tensions begins here in the same place, Tehran, 1979. The Iranian Revolution wasn't just a political upheaval. It was a seismic shift in the Middle East's balance of power. The Shah, Washington's closest regional partner, was overthrown. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile and established the Islamic Republic, a theocratic system built on the idea that Western influence was a corrupting force. The hostage crisis that followed, 52 Americans held for 444 days, carved a wound into the American psyche that never fully healed. Israel experienced its own shock. The Shah had been a quiet but reliable partner. The new Islamic Republic declared Israel an illegitimate state and began supporting militant groups opposed to its existence. From the very beginning, the conflict wasn't just political. In the 1980s, as Iran fought a brutal war with Saddam Hussein, a new institution rose to prominence, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC. The IRGC wasn't just a military force, it was a political, economic, and ideological powerhouse. Its Quds Force branch specialized in unconventional warfare, training, funding, and arming proxy groups across the region. When I spoke to a former US intelligence analyst, he described the IRGC this way. For Israel, this meant that Hezbollah in Lebanon, for the US, it meant attacks on American personnel. But this force was the Swiss Army knife of Iran. The IRGC had become central to Iran's regional strategy into the US-Israeli threat assessments. No issue has shaped US, Iran, and Israel-Iran relations more than Iran's nuclear program. Iran insists its program is peaceful. US and military officials have long argued that Iran sought capabilities that could shorten the path to a nuclear weapon. Israel's 1981 strike on Iraq's Sirak reactor and its 2007 strike on Syria's Al-Khobar reactor established a doctrine: prevent hostile states from acquiring nuclear weapons. Iran viewed this doctrine as aggression. Israel viewed it as survival. The US found itself caught between diplomacy and deterrence, negotiating agreements like the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, while simultaneously preparing for war. As I dug deeper, I really realized that in understanding the US actions required understanding something else entirely: the US Constitution's division of war powers. Article 1 gives Congress the power to declare war. Article 2 makes the president commander-in-chief. But modern conflicts rarely involve formal declarations of war. Instead, presidents rely on authorizations for use of military force, AUMFSs, inherent self-defense authority, interpretations of Article 2 powers, and congressional critics argue that presidents have stretched their authority too far. Executive branch lawyers argue that limited strikes, defensive actions, and operations against designated terrorist groups fall within presidential power. This constitutional ambiguity shapes every U.S. decision involving Iran. The U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 created a new arena for U.S.-Iran confrontation. American commanders accused the IRGC of supplying explosively formed penetrators, EFPs, and training Shiite militias that attacked U.S. troops. Iran denied the allegations, but the intelligence assessments were clear enough that they shaped U.S. military planning. Israel, meanwhile, fought Hezbollah in 2006, a conflict that reinforced its view of Iran as the architect of a regional proxy. By the 2010s, the conflict had moved into new domains. Cyber operations, including the Stuxnet attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, signaled a shift toward covert, deniable actions. Targeted killings, sabotage operations, maritime incidents, and proxy clashes became the norm. I happen to think that the era blurred the line between war and what was happening. In January of 2026, the U.S. was able to attack and kill the head of the security forces in Iran. And their actions, they said, were aimed at preventing imminent attacks. Critics questioned the legal basis of the intelligence assessments. Iran retaliated with missile strikes on U.S. forces in Iraq. The region braced for wider conflict. In the years that followed, Iran expanded its nuclear enrichment, increased its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, and limited international inspections. At the same time, Iranian-aligned groups carried out attacks on U.S. forces, commercial shipping, and regional partners. Israel conducted covert operations targeting nuclear scientists and IRGC infrastructure. The U.S. responded with targeted strikes on militia groups. Each action fed into the conflict. And when I began this investigation, I wanted to understand the official rationale behind recent U.S. and Israeli actions. Officials in both countries point to several factors: escalating attacks by Iranian-aligned militias, concerns about Iran's nuclear advances, threats to commercial shipping, regional instability, the need to protect U.S. personnel and allies. A senior U.S. defense official said that he would emphasize the defensive Israeli officials, and other officials, meanwhile, stressed the long-term strategic threat posed by Iran's nuclear program. These are the arguments policymakers make, but they exist within a larger, more confused conflict. From available documents, historical patterns, and interviews, several themes emerged on my part. Each strike, each proxy attack, each covert operation becomes part of a continuing conflict. Every U.S. action involving Iran reignites questions about presidential authority and congressional oversight. Iran's missile and drone capabilities have grown. U.S. and Israeli defense systems have adapted. The region is more interconnected and more volatile than ever. Both coexistence and conflict exist. Neither is sufficient on its own, of course, and in the middle of all this are the people who live with the consequences. the sailors escorting commercial ships through contested waters, the families in northern Israel sheltering from rocket fire, the civilians in Iraq and Syria caught between militias and airstrikes, the Iranian citizens living under sanctions and political upheaval. From 1979 to today, the US, Israel, and Iran have moved through cycles of confrontation, negotiation, escalation, and restraint. For each side carries its own history, its own fears, its own strategic logic. Understanding the present moment requires understanding all of it: the revolution, the war, the proxies, the nuclear shadow, the constitutional debates, the covert operations, the missile strikes, the diplomacy, those that almost worked, and the diplomacy that didn't. There are no simple narratives here, no simple cause, no single solution. Just a long, tangled history that continues to shape the decisions being made tonight. Decisions that echo across the desert, across the region, and across the world. And I realize that this story, this 40-year journey to the edge of conflict, is still being written. And that's the way it is, this 28th day of February, 2026. I'm Joe LaRosie.